Welcome
Hey.
to Clever Orbits. My name is Louis Brandmeier. I am co-hosting tonight with the illustrious writer, filmmaker, and actor, Frank Kim. Welcome, Frank.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's a pleasure, man. So Frank and I have been friends for about, 4 years?
It's going on 5 years.
5 years. Yeah, we met.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. We met around now in 2012.
Yep.
Cool. So, I've had the great privilege of witnessing Frank move from working partially, like part-time, on creative projects like his web series, post-apocalyptic web series that my sword starred in. Was the breakout star of the show, actually. To now, if you want to talk just a little bit about your YouTube channel, about Dungeons and Dragons, playing people. Remind me the title. What was?
Sure. So I'm a dungeon master for a web series called Heroes and Halfwits, and it's a show where I run a Dungeons and Dragons game for a group of players, and we film the whole shebang and put it on YouTube. And it's actually produced through a company called Rooster Teeth Productions, so you can also catch it at roosterteeth.com.
Awesome. Well, that's very exciting. We've got an actual filmmaker on. So tonight we will be talking about Stranger Things Season 1 and Season 2, specifically to start from the perspective of Frank's knowledge and expertise on the various references and Dungeons and Dragons that serve as the backdrop for the show. And that's very exciting for me because I didn't catch very much of it. I spent the past week, I think I started on Tuesday night, and pretty much all I really significantly accomplished during my Thanksgiving break of 4 or 5 days was to watch all of Stranger Things. And it's
That's impressive, man.
Good. Well, thank you. I'm glad someone is. I am. It did take a certain amount of commitment. Well, it was my first binge watching experience. I got an actual nice little blog article out of it called "The Ecstatic Erotics of Binge Watching," and that title's meant to draw them in.
Yeah, I'll say
it compares binge watching to being in a flow state or even a mystical experience, and it really was my space for a written review. This is more of an engaged, conversational review. But I honestly, the show in pretty much all of its aspects, I'm sure we'll get into this at some point, I give a 5 out of 4. Just the experience of it. Yes, you heard right.
I would agree with you on that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, you're pretty critical. I'd like to hear why from you. I mean, I've got my reasons, but just at the outset, where are your thoughts from?
Well, from a technical filmmaking, and by the way, thank you for saying that I'm a filmmaker. I am a burgeoning one, though. So I haven't actually produced, even on Heroes and Halfwits, I co-write, I'm the main writer. I co-produce and co-edit, and so forth. But anyway, I just from a filmmaking perspective, I think that series is pretty remarkable. Everyone comments about how Stranger Things has this, it takes place in the 80s, and so there's this 80s feel to it, and that's all great. And that does take a lot of thought and foreplanning for those who don't know kind of the behind the scenes of filmmaking, because little things like the shirt that an actor wears, when you're doing a period piece like that one, you can't have an actor wearing something that was made in the 2000s, right? And it seems obvious, but it's something that you have continuity staff who are specifically looking for that kind of stuff and managing all that, down to even things like the toys that are in the backgrounds of the kids' rooms, and they can't be wearing watches that were made after the 80s and things like that. So just technically, it's really impressive. And then story-wise is it's really dramatic and moving and funny and very entertaining. And I am of the opinion that our modern media right now is saturated with a lot of depressing content, or not even just depressing, but like very cynical content, and it's all kind of usually dark. Yeah, very dark, and usually it's under the guise of like, well, we want to be realistic, like audiences crave realism, and that could be true to a certain point, but I think the success of Stranger Things points at this sort of like a countercurrent to that, which is that, yeah, you can have a show that's realistic to a certain point, but then also is hopeful. And I think that that's what that series does really well, is they tell a story where, if you break it down to archetypes, it's really about good versus evil. So it could be considered very basic in that regard. But what is brilliant about that is that they execute it in a way that you really sympathize with the characters, and like when good wins, like I think especially the first season, I don't know about you, but when I was watching, I kind of figured out like, okay, by the end of the first season, they have to find Will. Like the series starts with the episode called The Vanishing of Will Byers, and so like by the end, they're going to find him, and he's going to probably be alive and well. But even so, like how they get you to that journey, through the journey and to that destination is really well done, and it's hopeful. It's not really cynical at all, but yet you feel like such an attachment and such a vibe with those characters. So I think that's brilliant. And of course, there's all the other stuff that goes with it, the production quality and the monsters and all that stuff is brilliant too.
Yeah, the CGI on those monsters was just excellent. I mean, seamless too.
I read that the second season per episode budget that Netflix gave them is pretty close to the budget that HBO gives to each episode of Game of Thrones, which is super impressive considering that if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, it's a medieval fantasy epic, and the battle scenes alone are just amazing. So for Stranger Things to have a budget rivaling that is really cool.
Yeah. I want to welcome Tyler Addison Brantmeyer.
Hey,
hello,
Tyler.
Guys. Good to be here. Is that Frank?
This is Frank.
Frank. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So yes, we were just discussing the production value, quality, and cost of Stranger Things, and how it basically rivals Game of Thrones. And do we have an exact figure for that, Frank? Do you happen to know? I'm just curious.
I don't off the top of my head. I'm sure that the World Wide Web can provide us with answers.
Indeed.
Yeah, that'll be one of those things I chalk up to do research on later. As I anticipate, this may or may not stretch beyond this one podcast into a second one, or technically a third, because Tyler and I did one on just initial thoughts on Stranger Things Season 1 on Thursday. But,
okay.
Yeah, I think the show's just good, and you're right about that optimism, that hope, like that positivity. Mm-hmm. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is dark. It is scary. It is like the first time that I've ever been gripped by a sci-fi horror narrative. Like you talk about The Thing or The Blob or whatever, like from the 80s. The Terminator kind of follows this same, I guess that was sci-fi horror. I never really characterized it in that way, but it is, because like there's a terrible monster thing coming at you, and it's relentless, and you can't stop it, and you got to find a way to survive. And like I think the charm of Stranger Things taken as a whole is that it captures, re-expresses, and pretty much ornately, elegantly organizes everything that was great about sci-fi and horror and fantasy from the 80s. And like there are a lot of, and you could probably speak more intelligently of this, but I got the real sense that there were a lot of tropes that were used from those films, and a lot of references to those films specifically. And also like the subtlety, you pointed this out, that you get with the fine details, the attention to the fine details of, for example, the shirts. Like there's a lot of nuance and a lot of intricacy to appreciate about each episode. And what I still most appreciate, and you can probably tell me if I'm right on this or not, it sounded like they were creating 80s style music like using the technologies and the kind of palette of the 80s to create soundtrack music. Like it sounded just enough like real 80s music that you're like, yeah, that sounds right. Like it sounds like something you'd see on a film or a show from that time, but it was just made. Like it wasn't. And a lot of times they would use actual 80s music, but did you notice that, Frank?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So for your listening audience, I was born in 1978, so I grew up through the 80s and watched all the movies that inspired Stranger Things.
Oh man, that makes you yet another version of expert for this podcast. You
uniquely qualified. Yeah.
I mean, I was 3 when I came out of the 80s. I barely knew my own name, so you have a big leg up on us.
That's a really flattering way of saying that I'm old as fuck, so I appreciate that.
I didn't really want to say that.
If we were going to say it, that's how we say it.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we had to, that would be the way to say it.
So yeah, I agree though. I think that the music, I noticed that as I was watching it too, and there's actually articles on the internet about how the composer and the composers, I should say, and the writers were inspired by things like The Thing, which is a John Carpenter horror sci-fi film from 1982 or 83, I think. And I think Carpenter even composed some of his own music for that movie. So anyway, taking some of those influences, it really inspired the music for this show. And actually, the two composers, if I'm going to bring this up because I don't know off the top of my head, but they're from an electronic band based out of here in Austin, Texas, called Survive. And so,
cool.
Yeah, they had all this like experience using synthesizers, and so the Duffer Brothers contracted 2 of them to come and do most of the music for this. But they even did actually, I think, buy the rights to use some 80s songs at different points in the series as well.
And so appropriately chosen, all of the different music. Like some of it was like on the nose, but on the nose in the exact way that you would expect from the 80s. Like,
well, I saw an article earlier saying that like someone wrote this headline for this article saying why Stranger Things is a better 80s movie than most 80s movies.
Oh, no, that's great. Yeah, we definitely. I'm interested in reading that. So, Tyler, now that we're through the first 2 seasons, all 3 of us, I spent all weekend working on this. Well, what are your thoughts on the whole show? Because I know we were really careful to make sure at the end of our last podcast to be like, all right, what are your thoughts on the show? But don't tell me anything about season 2. And I'm curious.
All right, whole show. Well, now having seen season 2, it builds on ways that you would expect a movie sequel to build from, like, say, back in the 80s. Take, for instance, that episode where the Demogorgon dogs, the Demodogs, as Dustin likes to call them, are overrunning the HAL building. Like, that's basically a callback to Aliens as a sequel, bigger, better, the shadow monster that inhabits Will. I thought it's a standard way to go, sure. I like that. I don't hate it. Everything about the season, save for that one where Eleven finds one of her lost sisters, quote unquote, who underwent similar experiments. I think everything it fit cohesively. There were a lot of twists and turns that I enjoyed in season 2, but on the show on the whole, I mean, it's one of those few where you just can't not forsake everything else in your life just to make sure that you catch the very next minute, the very next second, the very next episode. It's that enrapturing and captivating. I love
I was just telling Frank that I compared watching it to a mystical experience. So, just not to cut you off. Go ahead, though.
It almost certainly can be that way, yeah.
Well, and I think that's the brilliance of the writing, is that they are able to structure and craft each episode so that it just leads right into the next one. You want to find out what happens next, and I think it's very. I don't know for a fact if the Duffer Brothers ever played Dungeons and Dragons, but if they did, I'm sure they would have made great dungeon masters because they're able to keep the players going and like make them want to continue adventuring in this world.
Which is a perfect segue. Frank, because I've been peripherally curious about D&D, as it is called, for about as long as I've known you, and now you finally have the opportunity and the full attention of me and many other people to talk about like what it's like to play it and what some of these terms they throw around, like the party and the mage, whatever, and explain how it connects. I'm sure Tyler is also pretty curious because, Tyler, you've never played D&D either, have you?
No, I have friends who tell me about games that they hold even to this day every week, and I always want to be able to just sit down and create a character and join them, but I never seem to spare even 15 minutes to do so. But I think that'll change eventually because I've always wanted to play D&D and I've always been interested in it, and the show is sort of piquing my curiosity even more.
I actually think it's really fascinating when adults get into Dungeons and Dragons, and like you say, they sit down and they start creating a character, and then actually playing with a group. It's I know what it's like for me as a kid, but to watch an adult do it, I think is pretty fascinating. The current show that I'm on, I think two of the players out of our 5 players had never played before we started filming, and so. It was kind of cool to like coach them through that whole process of like, here's how you create your character, here's how you choose your weapons and your spells and all that stuff. It's great.
Love it.
Yeah. So I guess I'll introduce some terminology here. A party is not like how we normally think of the word party. In D&D, it refers to a group of adventurers. So the people that you play with, they are in your party, and then you have, as you travel through the game, you have encounters, basically. So they could be, benevolent encounters, like you talk to someone who is a villager who gives you important information. And those kind of characters, by the way, are also, there's a special terminology for that too. They're called NPCs, which means non-player character. So these are characters that your dungeon master is the one that actually is inhabiting the role of. And so when you and your band of adventurers come to a town, and stereotypical thing is to go to a tavern and start ordering ale. If you order ale from the bartender, your dungeon master is the one that plays that character. So anyway, with the encounters, there are those kind of encounters where you just talk to NPCs and you're accomplishing various pretty benevolent tasks or objectives. And then there are combat encounters, which is kind of like the meat of D&D, I guess. And the combat encounters are the ones where you come upon a monster, and your DM, again, like the dungeon master, the person who's sort of like refereeing this game, he or she will play that monster. And so you, as the party of adventurers, you start to roll dice. And that's what you see in Stranger Things at the beginning of the first episode in season 1, where the kids are around the table and they're playing. That all the dice rolling is used to determine things like how successful your character is at hitting the monster or casting a spell, or conversely, resisting the monster's attacks. So the monster might have a spell-like ability, and so if they cast a spell on you, you get to roll dice to determine how successfully your character is able to withstand that. This is fun. So I love teaching you.
I love it. I'm that much closer to setting foot in a dungeon and playing a game. So what was the big deal? And I kind of get it from a character point of view. We had a little headphone mess up there if there was any noise. But I get it from a character point of view. You got a new girl, and she wants in, and like we're familiar with our people, and we're not familiar with you. Can we trust you? Like, I get where they were coming from in saying, Maxine, hey, you're not part of our party. Like I got that as a general idea from within any kind of narrative. But the specifics of the D&D thing, like they started to name off roles, the maid, da-da-da-da-da. And she had this interesting, cutesy little argument, like, oh, I'm the Zoomer. And that made enough sense for me. Like, she's, I guess, kind of inventing her own role and saying, hey, you do need me. She kind of sold herself to him. But like from within D&D, are there like set roles for the party or set size or that kind of thing?
So there can be, and without going into all the too much of the politics of Dungeons and Dragons, yes, they've released now 5th edition, 5 editions to Dungeons and Dragons, and what each edition is a rule set. So there was the original, which they didn't even call first edition. It was just Dungeons and Dragons, I think, and then later there was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. But those rules were either updates to the pre-existing rules, or in the case of 4th edition, which is kind of notorious for this, they completely revamped the rules. And so within each edition, yeah, there are like rules sometimes, but sometimes not. So like in 4th edition, that was the one where the rules became the most kind of important or role to the gameplay. And you had things like strikers and controllers, and like they're basically like signifying what role you play on a team, kind of like if you're a football team. Like you would play a certain type of role and that's it. And if you try to deviate from that role, you could, but it would lead to mishaps usually for the entire party. So
because they're unfamiliar
so there's that.
with, yeah.
Well, it's because, okay, so like to use the sports analogy, like if you're on a team and you know that your role is to be a lineman, you have to block the incoming attackers, right? Like the people on the other team. And if you decide, you know what, I'm just going to be the quarterback, I'm just going to take this ball, I'm going to throw it somewhere, it doesn't work because the rest of your team hasn't prepared to make that kind of an adjustment necessarily. So, you know, the lineman suddenly picks up the ball and throws it downfield, and then it's like there's no one to catch it, or it gets intercepted by the other team. So in 4th Ed, it was kind of like that. Like there was a little bit of freedom where if you are, let's say a striker, which is someone who just deals a bunch of damage with one attack, but they're not necessarily like good at defending. They're not necessarily good at helping other teammates in terms of like healing. So, you know, if you were a striker, like that's the thing that you got to do, because the rest of the party is counting on you to deal out a whole bunch of damage, usually to like one big monster that's out there on the battlefield. And so if you're a striker and you decide, okay, you know what, I'm going to like start healing party members, the whole thing falls apart because now you don't have that ability. The party doesn't have the ability to deal out tons of damage to a creature. But that was 4th Ed, and some people really liked that, but a lot of people, myself included, didn't like that. And so we were really happy when 5th edition came out that updated the rules yet again. And in this like 5th Ed's the most current one as of, I guess, this recording. And so in that rule set, there is a lot more freedom. So you could be like, let's say, a magic user or wizard, and you could go and, you know, cast a bunch of like damage dealing spells to monsters, but you could also take a different approach, and you could be more of an indirect support to the party where you're doing things like making vines grow out of the terrain so that the monsters like find it more difficult to move around, you know, things like that. So there's a lot more freedom. But I think in the early 80s, when the show Stranger Things takes place, I think they were in 2nd edition at that point. And there are rules like that. There are like rules like that, but 2nd edition is a lot more fluid also. So you could be a magic user or a rogue or a fighter, and you generally, you know, each of those classes, you do have things that you're, you know, specifically integrally assigned to do, but there's a lot more freedom as far as how you want to approach the battles.
Love it. So what I get is that depending on what edition they were playing, that was a question that arose for me. Which edition do you think that they were playing with, like that they were referencing? I guess it was set in like 1983. So
83. It might have been right before 2nd edition then. So they might have been using what's called the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons rule set. And actually, now that I think about it, I think they even, I'll have to go back and watch this again, but I think they showed the cover of one of the books that they were using in an episode. And
yeah, they did.
It's a book they did? Okay, yeah. And I think I have that book. So it's like what is now considered basically 1st edition.
Yeah, the Mind Fryer discussion, or the Mind Flayer.
The Mind Flayer, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I love that they use that as an analogy for their monster in the series. Because the Mind Flayer is a very famous Dungeons and Dragons monster.
Apparently the Demogorgon is as well.
Yes. Demogorgon is he was actually introduced by Gary Gygax. So Gary Gygax is the guy who started Dungeons and Dragons back in the late 60s, early 70s, and he wrote a lot of the source material that has become now, oddly enough, popular culture. So like Demogorgon was one of his creations, and he envisioned him as a prince in the infinite layers of the abyss. So in the D&D cosmology, there's actually like heavens and hells, and you know if your adventurer actually dies, then there are rules for what happens to that person's soul, and depending on like the type, there's 9 different alignments that your character can choose from. So it's like sort of like these moral, philosophical outlooks that you have on life, and depending on which alignment you choose, when you die, your character can go to like a different, possibly one of 3 different hells. And so the abyss is like the most chaotic, basically. It's like when you're evil, but you're also super chaotic, kind of like the Joker, I guess. And so one of the rulers of the abyss is Demogorgon. And his thing is madness. Like, you know, he gibbers when you fight him, and he causes like your characters go insane before they can even get close enough to touch him and all this stuff. So yeah, he's a pretty cool character.
I think it's curious that they built all of that into the backdrop of the narrative. Like, people do have there's this whole concern through the whole first season, and then it resurges in the second season, which was kind of a mystery to me because you have all these supernatural things happening in season 1, and then season 2 people are doubting it. But like which eventually you realize, oh, this is kind of natural. So in the first season, you have this sense of like, yeah, I don't believe that. I don't believe that there's something really going on. You're just crazy, right? and so it's kind of a subtle valence of madness that's attributed to these people who see this creature. And I almost like the Demogorgon before we see what it looks like. I mean, it is hideous and it is like really interesting when you do finally see it, but I like it back when it was this formless, vaguely human shape without a face. Like there's something that's really terrifying, and it defies normal logic and normal assignment of structure to a being like you expect it. If it's a mammal, if it consumes flesh, like it's got to have a face, it's got to have eyes and all this. And
but it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't. And then you have like the larger creature. I forget what its name is. The shadow monster, I guess they call it.
Yeah, in the second
analogous
season.
to the Mind Flayer. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's another point about season 1 versus season 2. Like season 1, you have this like skepticism that everybody's met with, and then season 2, you have like a more global kind of skepticism. Like literally everybody outside of Hawkins who hasn't dealt with it needs to be convinced through this letter writing campaign thing. But from season 1 to season 2, you really do have a step up. It's like, all right, so 11 is fighting the big boss of the Demogorgon, and I really hoped that the Demogorgon just killed Dr. Brenner, but there are hints that he's not dead in season 2. And then season 2,
I love that you hate him so much.
He's so hateable. I love Matthew
It's easy to hate him.
So
hateable. I mean,
yeah.
The way that he manipulates and hurts children, and then is just kind of relentless and remorseless, and then ends up, what do you call it? It's not Stockholm Syndrome. It's like this perverse fatherhood relationship that he develops with 11. Like, that's a step too far. Like, all right, you're a normal, natural kind of villain if you do all those other things, but like, you kind of adopted this child that you're basically really just using in order to manipulate her psychologically. Like, that's just, no, we don't like that. That's bad.
Right, yeah.
So,
which I think is part of the brilliance of the show is in writing the character that way, because I think a large part of the audience who's watching it probably in some way understands him and at that level of like he has fatherly feelings for Elle. But then at the same time, you're presented with all the evidence that he's just a utter douchebag. and like holds other human life to be practically worthless. And so, it creates a cognitive dissonance, I guess, and you kind of like understand him, but you hate him and loathe him at the same time.
Yeah, he the way that they connected it to MK Ultra as well was kind of interesting. Like, had him be kind of trying to find out what is possible for humanity, and then develop it as a weapon. Like, and then the like merciless way that those people from the Hawkins lab building or whatever come after 11, like that gave me nothing but sympathy. I think here's the thing with him. It was more about the sympathy that I have for 11 and the vivid, visceral, like, experience that I have from within her point of view of him and of the people working for him, that kind of the narrative weight shifted, it seesawed in her direction so strongly that it seesawed away from him. Like, it was just like, yeah, I get what she's experienced with him, so I hate him even more. Like, I'm not even... And there was some of this in season 2 where there's this kind of depersonalization of evil, which I'm glad that the writers saw as soon as it crept in, and they intercepted really powerfully. Like, when people commit certain acts, both in a narrative and then in life, actually, you think of Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, etc., like, you start to not treat them as a person anymore. You start to, like, the accumulated weight of their negative actions or the bad things that they've done in the world, like, just turns them into what 11 calls them, bad men, the bad men. Like, and I loved that because on one level, it made it really easy and simple for the viewer to kind of understand what was going on. Like, okay, yeah, they're the bad men. And they're the bad men from my perspective because they've done bad things to me, or they do bad things. Like, but, I was so pleased that the moment I started to see this, they addressed it really powerfully in the narrative with the episode which was frankly, by the way, like, so out of left field for me, that 11 suddenly goes to a big city to meet her sister. I was just like, what is this show? Like, what's going on? But I loved it because, you actually have the narrative wrestling with itself over this question when you have Kali and her crew, like, they have so depersonalized evil that these people who did these bad things to us, they just deserve to die. And that's our whole mission, and that's what we do. And then enter 11, or Jane at that point, and she, responds to that tendency by and the narrative itself gives the answer too, by putting, children in his house, a picture of him with his children right next to him right before she's about to kill him, and her making the really stark decision, I'm not going to kill him, he's a person, and I'm going to stop you, Kali, from shooting him. Like, I thought that was so brilliant. Because it's, it's everywhere, from the Wilhelm scream in Star Wars when a stormtrooper gets killed, to, like, every villain. I mean, you have to understand every villain in every show or movie, if they're written well especially, you get to see this, has a narrative of their own, has a story of their own, has an origin for why they are the way that they are. You look at Breaking Bad. You see Walter White. He wasn't a villain. He started a sympathetic hero, and he turns into a villain, which is the beauty of that show. And like, the subtle shading of distinction over time is so subtle that you're sympathizing for and cheering on a villain at the end, and you're like, wait, really? I want a meth kingpin to win? How? So anyway, those were just some points that I've really, some burning things that I needed to get out around this show. But what did you guys think about all that, or what are some of your thoughts?
Well, I think that the show did that, the humanizing of the villainous aspects pretty well in the second season with Steve. He was kind of the villain. He was the big douchebag character in the first season, and then by season 2, he's sympathetic and he's helping Dustin and pick up chicks, and it's really cool. And he himself now has to face kind of the consequences of who he was being when that other kid shows up. I can't remember his name right now, and is like challenging him, Billy. Yeah, and I think he even Billy has a line of like, used to be the king of this school or something. Like clearly demonstrating the sort of kind of patriarchal view of power in society. And Steve is now becoming kind of the thoughtful one and sort of like reassessing his life choices up to that point.
Yeah, the rehabilitation, so to speak, of Steve was absolutely brilliant. I couldn't get enough of him after he switched into depth, there was always that kind of subtlety to him right under the surface, waiting to be tapped, and the more Nancy got with him, the more you saw kind of, he's having trouble writing his essays. He's not that smart maybe, and he's just trying to get through. But they also did that with, you say Billy, right? The big brother of
Billy
Maxine.
the bully. Yeah.
Yeah. And you see how he's literally just taking on the behaviors of his dad. Like he's literally just, this is how life is. This is the way that I experience things, and this is who I have to be in order to both survive it and to make my way. And I really like that with him. In fact, I really hope he gets with Nancy's mom next season at some point. Like there was just so much excitement about that. I was just like, that's exactly what she needs. She's reading a romance novel in the bathtub. Like, I mean, it's almost like the writers were just like, we've neglected her. Here's what we're going to give her. We're going to give her the experience of like one of her romantic heroes, and she's going to be like totally over excited about him. And because somebody joked that the standout hero of the show was actually the father, like her husband. Because he does nothing, and he's just so weak of a character, and those large glasses don't help. The sweaters that he wears, the like ballless nature of pretty much everything that he says and does. Yes, we're patriots. Like, okay, man.
What did I do?
What did I do? What did I do?
Yeah.
It's just dumb. Like, of course she wants a better man. Of course she wants, somebody who's more exciting than him. And Nancy even talks about it, like, yeah, she doesn't love him. They married because it was like convenient or something. And Nancy also, this is totally tangential, but I love Nancy. Just awesome, freaking beautiful, freaking like the subtlety of her difficulty in dealing with losing her virginity. Like there was just this like sadness that followed her. Like I almost felt like she was wrestling with the fact that she expected more from that experience than she got, and then. Like and everything was dark and sad, and that part of the narrative where the sort of high school drama bled into the sci-fi fantasy horror thing, like I was in it. I was just like, this is what this show is about, and I like this. I'm curious. I want to follow this thread through. And then of course he's still into her and wants to be with her, so she doesn't get the like broken dream of losing her virginity to somebody who she loves or allows herself to fall for because she's losing her virginity to him. Like he seemed like kind of a player. She listed off the number of people that he had been with, and so she missed. She bit the bullet. Like she missed it by like a couple feet or something. He could have easily just run through her like he did with everybody else, and then she would have been really sad. It would have been kind of catastrophic for her. Like. Because you got the sense when she was talking with Barb on the way to the party that she knew she was going to have sex, and she wanted it. And and she was, inviting Barb so that maybe she could feel just a little bit more comfortable as she danced on that edge and approached it. And, her getting drunk was her way of becoming more comfortable with it. And like, so she had clearly built it up to be this really important thing, or meaningful thing, maybe not that important, but anyway, I like how this show kind of tackles what it means to be a kid and young adult, and tackles friendship and love and family. I mean, these are part of why the writing was so good. Is it deals with universal themes and themes that it's easy for you to open your heart to and resonate with on the screen. Like I wept when I thought that they had actually found Billy's body. As I said in the last podcast, I was on my knees in prayer to God.
Did you say Billy? You mean Will?
Will, sorry. Of course, probably someone at some point called him Billy because William, right? But no, we know that it's Will Byers that I'm talking about. I just like it. The characters are so well drawn, the themes, the plot. It's just, anyway.
Yeah.
I'm fighting the urge to watch it again. I'm probably going to show it to my mentor, and then we're going to both be hooked for a month or two. But yeah, I mean, I could go all night. I got a lot of great themes about both seasons.
Yeah.
But
no, I agree with you though on the writing. Like it's fantastic, and this is that, like, as far as sci-fi is concerned, I love it when sci-fi has a genuine heart at its center, and I feel like that's what Stranger Things does. Is, you know, there's all this stuff about other dimensions and alien creatures, but at its heart, it's like, you know, at times a family drama or a romance or a friendship story, and so, you know, whatever, like, it's always exploring the core human emotions. I love that.
yeah, you know, I finally am able to process and hear the criticisms that people have been making of Discovery. Like, when you put this next to Discovery, it really does seem more lighthearted and heart-centered than Discovery. And even Orville kind of comes off as more heart-centered because you've got real sense of deep sympathy with the characters, whereas in Discovery, you do have some sense of sympathy. You've got understanding on the part of the narrative for the characters, but a lot of them are so ambiguous. To quote Richard from a couple episodes ago, actually from the last episode of season 1, he was talking about how, like, there was one moment when he was like, well, the writers have built this character in such a way that I don't know what to feel right now. Should I be sympathizing or should I be, like, worried? And so, like, there's a point at which you can lose a sort of simplistic relationship to the character when you build them to be so subtle. And simplistic in an emotional sense, like, I feel them, I want them to succeed, I hold them up as, like, they're good, and I want what's best for them, right? Like, you don't get that with somebody who makes a morally ambiguous decision, like, well, or a flat-out wrong decision, like Vulcan neck pinching her captain. I mean, like, it's kind of hard to agree with that. I mean, even if she was partially coming from, like, caring for her captain and wanting to save her crew and whatever, like these are just kids for the most part, and they're doing the best that they can, and so it's like you want them to succeed. Especially, you know, it veered off into high school drama again near the end, but it was beautiful. Where Nancy grabs Dustin and, like, dances with him, I just thought that was so good.
Yeah.
And then,
I
mean, it was like
the first scene that they thought about before writing the entire second season. The Duffer Brothers were like, yeah, it's going to end in a ball called the snowball. This is where it's all going to lead. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. That's great. Yeah, I thought, and I especially thought, you know, from a social dynamics student perspective, I thought it was just so great that she, after he had been rejected. So number one, I like that he persisted some. I mean, he clearly at some point made something up about himself and stopped and you know, sat down and started weeping. But, like, number one, he was persistent. He kept trying. He kept looking for somebody to dance with him. And number two, like, immediate, powerful social proof. Like, she not only was affirming him, like, in himself, she was affirming him to the room. Like, he's so cool that even though none of you guys are with him right now, somebody older and hotter is choosing to dance with him. So take that. Like, I thought that was so cool.
I love how you phrase that. Yeah, that was brilliant. And I liked also in that scene that, you know, the other characters got to, like, kiss their girls and, you know, like, kind of, like, completed all of those story arcs.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for Will, it was random girl number 35 who called him Zombie Boy. That was kind of
I like that, though. Actually, you know, I one thing I've noticed, though, is that they I think Will is, like, going to become a player or something, because there was that one girl that was crying over him at his pseudo funeral.
Oh, right. She was really pretty, too. Yeah, and they made a point out of telling him. I loved that scene where they go out of their way to, like, tell the story to him on his, like, head. That was so cool. Like, all of this really happened, by the way. And she cried at your funeral and da-da-da-da. So I also love that 11 finally is just straight up with Mike, and she now looks like a girl. I mean, like, she can look however she wants. I'm happy with that. That's fine. But, like, she looks like the beautiful woman that she is capable of choosing to be. And that's another thing, is, like, she starts off with androgyny, kind of, like a really confusing androgyny. I mean, it's clear that she's a girl from like dialogue and stuff, but like she could easily be a boy just from the way that she looks. And so she kind of
and they make a point of that too in the first season.
Yeah, she like evolves into an appreciation of what it can mean, and that's important. What it can mean to be a woman. And like she's as strong, as capable, and as powerful, if not more so, than any male character on the show, including the adults. Which you know we see it's difficult for Hopper to deal with, like as a faux parent, and then even just as a like character. Like, all right, well, I guess I'm okay with this look of yours. It's bitchin'. Yeah, you can call it that if you want. Like he's just kind of grumpy and confused.
That was a heartfelt moment. And even he gets scared, too. Imagine having a child like that with those powers.
Yeah.
How would you discipline them?
Yeah, but
he stands his ground. Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, he maintains a sense of authority in the face of extraordinary power and just, like, brattiness. That's your word of the day. So in the Honest trailer, they talk about how this show is primarily populated by looks and vocabulary words. Like because, you know, 11, she's always like, what is that word? What is that word? Like she repeats the word. And they continued that theme in season 2. Like they even became self-conscious of it, like where Hopper's like, here's your word of the day. It's just like, okay. Yeah, she has this variability. She takes on the appearance of a woman to blend in at the school near the end of season 1, and then she takes on this whole like punk look in the middle of season 2, and then she's got like hair finally, which makes her look, she could still be kind of androgynous in the beginning of season 2. But like, anyway, the play in her looks is a real kind of statement in feminism, I think. Like a statement of the capacity for variability in female expression and as a matter of choice. And most of her expressions were kind of compelled. You only really get a fully chosen expression. Maybe even the one when she meets Kali is kind of foisted upon her less so that she can fit in. But the fact that she's able to inhabit all of those roles, I think, says something interesting about femininity in general. You know, masculine, people who want to be masculine generally are expected to look a certain way, act a certain way. They have a kind of linearity to their role and to their appearance. And, you get a kind of nod to this when Dustin is like, you use Farrah Fawcett spray, like on your hair. And she's, anyway, does that kind of make sense? Did that point land about 11?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also appreciate her character's changing looks from the perspective of a writer, because they craft the story where in this first season you have this telekinetic girl who is being experimented upon in a laboratory setting. And so, if they're hooking up electrodes to her head all the time, you do have to have someone like that. You have to have them shave their head. And so that it fits like a story purpose that she had her head shaved, but then from an aesthetic point of view, and then like these greater social themes, it fits, perfectly to have this girl who's got her head shaved. And then like her looks change even in the first season where she's putting on the ET wig and dressing up and going out and, all that stuff. And so I just really admire the elegance of that.
Yeah, I just heard from Tyler. He's got to go shortly. So, Tyler, final thoughts on Stranger Things, just in general. Any burning points that you want to make?
Burning points. I don't know. I agree with David Harbour when I say I want to see his character punch more people next season. Because it was nothing but fists to poor guards and other just doing my job type faces in the first season. And season 2 had precious little of that.
They do on the Honest trailer. They make fun of that too. They say he decks pretty much everybody he can get to.
Yeah. I think God, everything you guys have articulated. There's not really too much I could add. I remember one thing from the snowball scene where Dustin was sitting crying before Nancy walked up to him. Jim Rash on Beyond Stranger Things, when they were talking with the Duffer Brothers and the rest of the cast, they had mentioned that there was this big tatted up, like bearded cameraman who was training the camera on Dustin's face, and he was just almost in tears himself because of this kid just crying his eyes out. Yeah, which is it's just funny to think about, that if you were standing by and watching this cameraman who's just almost about to bawl his eyes out because of the kid, it was a wonderful moment that Nancy came and got him and said, "Yeah, no, you really are cool. Don't worry about them."
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah. All I can say is just nothing but I can only say great things about this show, and I look forward to what the Duffer Brothers have in store for season 3 and beyond.
Same here.
Well, with that,
fun,
we bid you an upside down less evening, Tyler. May your evening be free of the shadow monster.
See you around in the upside down. Yes.
Yeah, I still think that would. Well, actually, you know what? Now that I'm realizing it, that goodbye is as corny as you would expect from the 80s. So we're happy about that. Hope you don't frown from the upside down.
Oh, yes. Hey, stay upbeat. Don't take a seat. All right. See you guys.
All right, man.
Take care.
But yeah, so we have I've got a lot of specific points for specific episodes and kind of general questions. And let's say we go for another, 20, 30 minutes. And then if we've got more, maybe we do a follow-up.
Sure.
Awesome.
I'm down.
Cool. Well, so I loved that it seemed like, and then we don't know now that it's been advertised in the second season, and maybe it's not. I did like that the Demogorgon, one big bad, killed another big bad. I was like, that's so nice and wrapped up in a little bow. I mean, it's poetic justice too. You open this hole in reality, and a thing that came from it killed you. Good. Seems appropriate. But they may undo that, so that's a thing. But
wait, they may What do you mean?
Well, so the narrative suggests that he's killed at the end of season 1. Like, you just see the Demogorgon go off on him, and you see him go down, Dr. Brenner. But then you hear from that guy that maybe he's still alive in the end of season 2. So maybe it's true that one big bad killed another, maybe not. But there were other.
Hopefully, they have a really good story reason for why that is, because it looked like he was probably pretty dead there.
Yeah, I mean, more than somewhat, more than slightly dead. One thing that I noticed from a filmmaking perspective that was interesting, like cinematography-wise, was that there was a lot of darkness and a lot of play of color and light, and I often found it very difficult to see what was going on, and I found, and that must have been intentional, like they're out in the woods in the middle of the night, it's so dark, you don't see anything, or you see the person, their face is in shadow, and you can barely see what's going on until they open the trunk of their car. Like, did you notice that, or did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. My thought was, especially in the first season, like when Nancy and Jonathan are out in the woods and, they're like looking for Will, that struck me as being very, almost like a fantasy movie, kind of at that point. But then there are other times where, I think it's in season 2, I forget now, but like I remember an episode where they're out, it's like you can't make out details, and that struck me as very much a like 1970s horror film, where they, it was back when they were still shooting everything on film, and they're just like completely underexposing the film, and it's intentional. Like you can't, you're supposed to be uncertain and scared because of our instinctual fear of the dark.
So it was a whole atmosphere they were creating.
I think so. Yeah.
I was really looking to make some sense of that. I was really hoping it wasn't just that they filmed it in a way that made it difficult to see.
I mean, I assume all that, because just based on the level of care that everything else in that series demonstrates, I would assume that they knew how to create certain tones and atmospheres from moment by moment.
For sure. There's a really strong sense of the unknown and being afraid of the unknown, and like the unknown's actually kind of Lovecraftian horror that if you look at it, it'll terrify you because it's all really just going to kill you and merciless and doesn't care and like really horrific. And anyway, I mean, the whole idea, and I thought it was kind of a weak ending to Stranger Things 2 in terms of setting things up for the next season, but I did like the creepy kind of factor of that monster, the shadow monster, which appears to be made of somewhat stabilized tornadoes. Like, that's as far as I've gotten, like, which is really cool if that is what's going on with that thing. Also has no face. Like, just this thing is, like, apparently near the snowball or knows that the snowball is going on, knows that it's like enemies are there in the right side up, is what I'm going to call it, the normal universe, and is like intent on either paying attention to what's going on there, following up on it, or like continuing to be a threat to the main reality. Like I thought it wasn't specific enough a threat for us to really be concerned. It was just kind of like, all right, well, it's still there. Yeah, of course it's still there. I mean, it was right there behind the wound in reality that 11 closed. I mean, it was right there. And I kind of, I also liked the way that she didn't face it directly. She just faced the wound and closed the gate because it was truly overpowering. Like you'd need, and I think this might be where they go with season 3, you'd need multiple people with superpowers to fight that thing at the same time, I think, in order for them to actually defeat it. So, you got to get Kali on board. You got to get 6, 10, and 9 or whatever. I guess she was 9. I don't even remember. But like that's kind of the breadcrumb they left for season 3. Was like, all right, we've got all these other people, 1 through 11, to be accounted for, and but like
they may
go ahead. Yeah.
Well, they may very well reveal that some of those other, like the other 10 children, may be dead. Like given Brenner's history, I mean, not that he would have necessarily killed them himself, but just through like rigorous experimentation, some of them may have just perished.
Yeah, maybe the first half dozen or so, like the mental power creation didn't take. I mean, it just didn't work. And I'm curious, they made it sound like 11 opened the gate, but I don't think I ever got a clear scene or a flashback or something where her mind, her mental power, caused that gate to open. Am I missing something? Did I not see?
No, I don't think they. Well, there is an episode in the first season where, in flashback, you see that she, Brenner sends her into the sensory deprivation tank. She ends up in that kind of dark space, and the monster is attracted to her for some reason. And then Brenner is like kind of almost encouraging that first contact to happen. And then out of that, when she's freaking out, is when I think you see the first signs of the gate open. And
okay.
And then she does have a line in episode 4, I think. I forget. Maybe not 4. But where it's after she saves Will from the bullies at the gully, and she kind of collapses from her exertions. She says that she is the monster, that she opened the gate. And so, she's like, I don't think she's literally the monster, although there are some fan theories out there about that. But I think what she's saying is like she's responsible for the monster becoming a plague in our world.
Right. Okay. So it was her mental power and her ability that was exploited by the Hawkins energy people or whatever that had that gate open. So it wasn't directly her intention or even her acting it was her acting on a specific will in an experiment, but it was more like she made that layer of reality aware of us, and that layer of reality, because of its evil, nefarious nature, like is curious about us and now wants to take over and destroy. So
right.
and
Well, I think it's possible. Who knows where the showrunners will go with this, but I think it's possible that there have been other forays into the Upside Down before what we see in season 1, either through government experimentation or some other means. Like maybe they were just naturally gifted that were born without drugs and all.
It's a good point. And if you're moving, it got a little spotty at that. I was having trouble hearing you.
Okay, yeah. I'll stay still.
Oh, thank you.
No ventures into alternate dimensions for me.
Thanks for not opening any gates.
Sure thing.
So one thing that I was curious about, and there are a lot of there's a couple of points to make about the Upside Down. One is like the Upside Down versus like the variety of evil you get there is just impersonal, heartless, destructive, clearly terrible. Like these things just want to eat us. They don't really care. They have no concept of us having any meaning or value other than as food or as things to conquer. Like I like that. That was stark. Like so just as you get the depersonalization of evil people and then the repersonalization of them on our side, you get the real bleak depiction of a kind of evil that's just so evil that you're screwed. Like when you have to relate to it. And so another thing about the Upside Down, like where does all this civilized infrastructure come from? And what is all that organic stuff? Like so when you look at the Hawkins Middle School, somebody had to build that, right? And it's clearly a human artifact. But why is there a Hawkins Middle School on the other side in the other dimension? Like I get it. Most things like have some correspondent thing, like a tree or a rock or whatever. Yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, number one, why is all this civilized infrastructure exactly the same, even though there's no people to inhabit it? Maybe they were all killed. Okay. And then why is it precisely matching beat for beat what's going on in our reality? Like you saw in those very last scenes of season 2, you see lights up in the Hawkins Middle School dance building. And you're like, well, okay, so it knows that the snowball is going on because it sees the lights that are here in the Upside Down or whatever. And so, like, if there are no people, how did they put the lights up? Like, where did the lights come from? I'm curious to hear any thoughts you might have on that. Like, and maybe D&D will give us a better answer.
D&D is the source of all answers.
And that'll be the only quote. That's what we'll call this episode. Hopefully not.
I think, it's interesting from the story perspective. What I think of is in the first season when, in episode 8, when they're like, there's clearly interactions where, who was it? So I think Joyce and someone was in their house, and then they saw. Oh no, it was Jonathan, Nancy, and Steve were in the house after they had to fight off the Demogorgon, and then they saw indications that Hopper and Joyce were in the Upside Down, right? Like it was I forget exactly how I think it was the lights. The lights flickered in a certain way.
They can even hear each other. They can hear when people are yelling loud enough. Right. That's
true. At certain points, they can. Yeah, I think if they're near like gates to the other side, they can. Yeah, sound seems to carry. It's so. I think maybe with the buildings, like there may be this sort of parallelism where even though there aren't people around to build a middle school in the Upside Down, there maybe like this sort of synchronicity that happens where when someone on our side builds a middle school, then that could appear in the Upside Down. It's like as far as what we've actually seen, there's no real clue one way or another. We just see that there are buildings there somehow, and even like the city, right? Like I think you see Hawkins when Joyce and Hopper are traveling through there initially in season 1. Like you can see the library and stuff. In fact, I think that's where they find Will, is inside the upside-down version of the city library or the town library.
Right. Yeah. So, okay.
So it just, I'm not really satisfied with that answer, but.
Well, but see, this is the thing. I don't think we're we're supposed to be, because okay, so from a meta perspective here, in Dungeons and Dragons, the Shadowfell is kind of what it is, the analog to the Upside Down. And the Shadowfell is described in a lot of different ways, but one of the ways is that it is like a darker version of our reality. So you could see things like if there's a temple that's on the prime material plane, which is our normal universe, then that same but like twisted version of that temple could appear in the Shadowfell for whatever reason, spontaneously. And I think even in so many people have remarked about how Stranger Things is like, it harkens back to the 80s, and there's all these like Stephen King references, among other things. And Stephen King wrote a novel called The Talisman with another writer named Peter Straub back in the 90s, I think it was. And in The Talisman, there's a whole through line about how there's a boy from our world who is able to travel between our world to this other dimension. And the other dimension is basically our world, but it's been twisted. And it's also, distances are either, I forget if it's shrunk or expanded. It's one or the other. So it's like, 1 mile does not equal 1 mile in the other world. And so in that version, like, there are things, like the boy sees things from our world, like a building that he knows or whatever, but it's twisted. There's something just off about it. So who knows? Maybe the writers are taking cues from Stephen King and, in building that into their mythology.
Yeah, and there's also something about it, like you could take the fantastical kind of fantasy angle of like, it's just there. I only
right.
And that's another thing about this that at first might have been unpalatable, like coming from Star Trek and Fringe and the X-Files, where basically they lean heavier on the science than the fiction part. Like, this is more fantasy. Like,
sure.
It's self-consistent and it's non-contradictory. It makes sense and it works. But like, not everything has to have an explanation. Like where did the Demigorgon come from, or how did it evolve, or how does this giant tornado monster come to be? Like,
mm-hmm.
We don't have explanations, and we might never get them.
Sure, yeah, and that I think is also part of it too. The series references H.P. Lovecraft, who wrote The Call of Cthulhu and all these stories about these strange, very ancient, otherworldly beings that just are so alien to us that just even coming within proximity of them drives people to madness. And so they're like the ultimate forms of chaos. So, maybe that's part of the mythology of this show, is that like that shadow monster has just been around for eons, and it just, is a thing of chaos. Like, it's impossible to understand.
Yeah, I think the breakout star of Sin 2 was not in fact Bob. I think it was the shadow monster. I think that thing did a lot of great acting with no face. I think it made
takes some real talent.
Yeah, it was a very talented use of like tornado arm tentacle things. Like probably the best I've seen since I've seen arm tornado tentacle things.
You see a lot of those, do you?
The what?
Nothing.
Oh,
I was just saying, you see a lot of those, do you?
No, this is actually the first and only time. I think it was interesting, like, that the Demigorgon could travel between dimensions, sometimes like without much effort at all. Like it seemed like it was caught in the trap or whatever, and then it disappeared. Mm-hmm. And I guess they kind of had to have walls to come through. Like maybe there's some kind of space-time fabric weakening thing that goes on in certain areas that makes them more likely to be gates or whatnot. I'll let the universe, from within the universe, answer that question if it ever becomes interesting enough for the writers to address it. However,
well, I have a personal theory about that.
Please.
That relates to that. So, by the way, Hawkins Power and Lighting, the fake power company that the government operates behind the show, those initials, HPL, match H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh, of course.
Which I find hilarious.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
But so I think that the monster, especially in season 1, I think it's able to travel across the dimensions, mainly because, El opens up the initial gate. So that kind of like weakens the fabric of time and space. But then also, I think the monster is able to do that to hunt its prey, which are pretty much anyone. But I think specifically, like its delicacy, if you will, are these like sensitive children. These, or I guess even they could be adults too. But like in the show, it's these children who have some ability, like El. It initially is attracted to El in that weird dark mind space, and then comes and finds her, and then causes the gate to open, all that. But in the first episode, I think it's Will. And the whole first season is built upon this whole idea that Will vanishes, and then everyone's looking for him. And meanwhile, he survives a week in the Upside Down. And when they show Joyce and Hopper going into the Upside Down, they have to have containment suits. Like Hopper's initial foray in there, he's like coughing up a lung. It's a very toxic environment. But you have Will, who's able to survive there for up to a week. I mean, he's dying by the end of the week, of course, and like when they find him. But nonetheless, like there's something. So my whole pet theory here is that Will is a special boy, kind of like El is a special girl. Like he has abilities that are latent and not as highly developed as El's, because he hasn't been tested and probed and shot up with drugs and all that stuff. But I think it's there. And so when the monster appears, in that very first sequence in episode 1 of season 1, he's in the shed. Will's in the shed. He loads up his rifle, and he's like waiting for the monster to come in. And the monster is suddenly behind it, right? Like, how did it get there? And when you look in that shot, there's no portal. There's none of that like weird pink, moist, whatever, like rift material that's there. So the monster somehow just appeared magically behind Will, and then captures Will, and then actually goes back to the Upside Down without leaving a trace. And so I think that it's this combination of the monster's ability to hunt prey across not only distance but also dimensions when the fabric of reality is weak enough. But it's also, I think, Will. I think he has this some sort of a weird ability to where he can influence things across dimensions. And you see that also with how Joyce communicates with him when she's still looking for him, and she strings up the Christmas lights and writes letters underneath them. And so how did Will see that in the Upside Down, right? Like, it's never really explained, but somehow he knew, or he was able to, or maybe like what we were talking about with the middle school, like those lights and letters may have appeared spontaneously in the Upside Down version of his house. And so as Will is hiding there, he sees that, and then he's still able to influence them in such a way that, like, Joyce on the other side of that reality is able to see the lights lighting up. So I think when you talk about this like band of superheroes that will have to fight the Shadow Monster in a future season, I think Will be one of the people in that lineup, because he has this affinity with the Upside Down. Now, it hasn't always served him well, like in season 2, where he's controlled by the monster. But if he can learn to control his abilities himself and develop them further, then he could be a formidable opponent and help people like El. So that's my theory.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, this idea that maybe he always had that connection, and it wasn't merely the result of his interactions with the monster, and that it was that connection that attracted the monster to begin with. I think that's really interesting. I'm curious now, in a related way, like if we're going to get some explanation for what that organic material is, that the what do you call it, the pink moist abundance. It's one phrase for it that unites the realities. Like, this is one of the most bizarre depictions of like an alternate dimension and the connective tissue between dimensions that I've ever seen in fiction. And it makes it really interesting. And the fact that it's like this organic, tentacly, monstrous, will consume you if you get too close thing that you have to like treat by firing from a flamethrower at it to keep it from growing too strong. Like, it's really cool. It's really interesting. But I also like, and maybe it's just the way that things go in that reality is kind of snowy, as if it were just, impacted by a radioactive event, and full of this organic terror matter stuff. And maybe the way that the Upside Down came to be so dark and dour. I mean, it actually maybe there's no sun in the Upside Down. Like maybe in that reality.
Any sun.
Yeah, we never see it during light. And I mean, thematically, it would never make sense for us to see the Demogorgon in light, or that big shadow monster in light. Like it's got to be dark, scary, gritty, evil, and like it just thematically that's how it's drawn. So like maybe these creatures. This would explain a lot. These creatures kind of had to evolve under extremely harsh conditions, and they kind of have, and maybe they're not just evil. Maybe they're very rabid, violent, vehement, and sharp in their ability to doggedly pursue survival through the annihilation and the incorporation and maybe the digestion of any other being that they encounter. And maybe that's how this, because ultimately the Demogorgon was just a piece. Like the one from the first season, I liked how it was just a piece of this much larger mind control, collective consciousness thing. And so maybe that thing developed in relation to the harsh conditions, and its strength of will towards like conquering things is just the way that it survived. And so I guess we finally got the personalization or the sympathization with that evil too.
Yeah, I think whenever from a story perspective, it's interesting that they have these moments of sort of built-in story elements where you can kind of understand, if not sympathize, with even things like those monsters. And then thematically, I think you're pointing out something very interesting about, that there is this sort of relentless pursuit of survival by these creatures and by the shadow monster in general. It is probably a very harsh environment. I mean, yeah, clearly it's a toxic environment. Like, not a lot of nice green vegetable matter grows out there, apparently.
Yeah, the only stuff that survives is this like voracious, parasitic Venus flytrap-like black tentacle monster matter. I mean, and that same quality is shared by the demidogs, the Demogorgon, and the what do you call it? The Cthulhu monster. I'm just going to call it the Cthulhu monster.
Cthulhu monster.
Tornado Cthulhu monster.
Well, by the way, I think it's very interesting that there's that comparison with Cthulhu, and then they call it, they use the Mind Flayer analogy in that episode, because a lot of this is not only deriving from, H.P. Lovecraft, but also Giger, H.R. Giger or Geiger? I don't know how to say his last name, but the guy who inspired Geiger. The artist that went on to inspire the Alien movies. And in that whole sci-fi franchise, the xenomorphs are, they can gestate in humans, and once they are born violently, they do nothing but just kill and consume. I mean, they're just like relentless. And there's this whole thing of, in the original Alien movie, I think it was Ash, the android, who says something like that they're just like perfection, because they're not inhibited by morality or ethics or all these like constructs of civilization. They kill and they survive. And I think that's kind of like in Stranger Things with the Demogorgon monsters. Like they grow. There is that moment though where D'Artagnan is like, apparently has some kinship with Dustin. But for the most part, they're just very ruthless, and they're killers, and they're very efficient at it. And then, and especially since they have this sort of hive mind that's being controlled by that greater being. And also I want to just point out something too from a D&D perspective. It's awesome because the Mind Flayers in Dungeons and Dragons, in that whole lore, they once had an empire. So the Mind Flayers can use their tentacles to basically control your brains. They can, like, the tentacles, they wrap you up. The tentacles go up your nostrils, and they interact with your brain, and you become a thrall to them, and you just do whatever. And so the story in D&D is that they have this, like, worlds-spanning empire for many millennia, and, there were just, like, billions upon billions of, like, brainless slaves that they had. And then eventually those slaves evolved resistances to the Mind Flayer control. And so then a slave revolt happens, and then they're overthrown. Now, most of the time when you play Dungeons & Dragons, the Mind Flayers are, like, solitary, and they're usually lurking in, like, deep, dark caves and tunnels and, kind of shun the light and all this stuff. But the whole idea of them controlling things, like using mind powers to send minions and thralls out to the surface and interact and influence events is pretty cool. And and the fact that they incorporate that into the series is pretty neat. I like that.
Yeah, I especially like the background for that character. I mean, to think of it as a character and to think of it like as having had some analog in D&D, like that gives us something to talk about. Which, I mean, by his nature, he's more interesting when you don't have anything to say about him, like, or in, like, just sheer terror with tornadoes.
Right.
And a nose. Apparently it has a nose, I think.
Well, and if they're going with the whole idea that it's this being of pure chaos and evil, then, yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to have a backstory, right? Like, it could, because I think writing in genre stuff like this it's great to humanize all these other antagonistic forces, but if you really want just like a pure, unstoppable alien bad guy, you can always write that in and just say, like, this is an alien monstrosity from some unknown dimension and region of space, and you just can't even understand it. Like, its brain is so foreign to how life developed on Earth that its motivations and everything are just, like, unknowable to us.
Yeah, which really makes it the most interesting. I mean, like, it's so perpendicular from everything that's familiar. Just why people want to see it, why people want to understand it. So I've just got a couple things to say about some specific episodes from season 2, and then I think we'll be ready to wrap up.
Okay.
I like when, I think it's in episode 4 of 2, Lucas gives Maxine basically the plot summary, and then she reviews it. She's like, yeah, I thought it was kind of derivative. And it was this cute little moment where it seemed like the writers were reviewing themselves. Like they have this chance to talk about what they've done in season 1 from within the universe, from one character to another. And I thought, that's funny. That's cute. I've never seen that anywhere. It's kind of meta fiction.
Yeah, it's good that they can poke fun at themselves.
Yeah, especially with the character of Maxine. I liked the introduction of Maxine. I thought it was great to have kind of a perspective of someone who wasn't really present for the events of the first season, but who's impacted by them and who wants to be included. It's the classic narrative trope of, like, all right, so who's our outsider character trying to understand this world?
Yeah. Isn't that interesting that in season 1, the kids are the outsiders, and now by season 2, they've become the insiders, the cool clique, and there's, like, other kids now that are the outsiders that went in on that. Huh.
Well, I mean, it's subtler than that because, like, they initially want to include her to some extent, or they want to get related to her, and she
Mike doesn't.
Yeah, Mike does. And then she develops her own desire to want to get related to it, and then she's got her skepticism. Anyway, I like her arc. Arc with them. Right up into the point where she kisses Lucas. Like, I thought that was great. I thought it was kind of sad that she had to choose one. I mean, that's just the plague of traditional relationship styles. Yeah, she could have had a polyamorous relationship with both of them. No, I'm not gonna grind that axe. But
Yeah, try to sell that to the producers at Netflix.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, they actually, there's another series that's just about that, but it's glorified in its novelty. It's based on a Spike Lee movie.
Well, but I'm saying, like,
if
you're trying to like say that these kids are going to have polyamorous relationships, that might be a bit of a tough sell.
Yeah, they're not gonna go for that. That's not relatable. And it's funny because the same things that make it relatable, that make it interesting, like I wouldn't change those. Like the monogamous relationship style that's at the heart of all this. It's beautiful. I'm probably monogamous at heart, so. But episode 5, when I like how helpful the new Hawkins scientists are. I mean, it was a great development for them. Like, it was a great direction to go. Like, they're not quite villains anymore. They're only peripherally, like, they do things that are inconvenient now. Like it's those scientists are not following an evil master. They're following this fairly sympathetic guy who's, like, still a scientist, but he's approachable and he's understandable. I like, especially, this was just beautiful, when they rescue Hopper, when Joyce and Bob rescues Hopper, or rescue Hopper, and Hopper goes, "Hi, Bob," and he goes, "Hi, Jim." It's just like perfect, because they're in the middle of this horrific, upside down, whatever. "Hi, Bob." "Hi, Jim."
Yeah, I love the backstory that, Hopper was probably in high school, one of the kids that picked on him and, like, bullied him maybe, but now they have this, like, more mature relationship of, like, mutual respect.
Yeah, I do like the generational sense, like where Hopper talks to Joyce about smoking, and the guy who was around during their dance isn't around anymore, and Bob's going to the AV club, and, like, it's really cool that they are the past of the city, and they're still around. And then I thought Bob being killed, that was great. I mean, it was terrible. I didn't like it, but I loved that it happened. I mean, meaning I didn't like to experience it because I love Bob, great character, but something horrific needed to happen in the narrative at some point as a consequence of all this flirting with terrible disaster. And those last, like, 3 episodes of season 2, like, you really up the ante. You get, like, infinite demi-dogs. Like, and you get, like, this horrible monster coming through and, making these tunnels under Hawkins. Like, the escalation was well done. And usually sequels aren't able to do that, where you've got, bad guy 1, all right, well, let's just multiply. Let's have several of that bad guy, from Alien to Aliens or whatever. Like, I mean, in this, you added subtlety, or the writers added subtlety to the bad guys that made it more interesting, and that added a level of depth to the first season. And there's another thing, too. Like, the first Demogorgon was kind of humanoid, was kind of bipedal. And now you get these other ones that are more like dogs. And so you even and then you also get Dart, which initially was kind of like a slug. So you get this sense of the Mind Flayer, Shadow Monster thing, being able to take different forms. And maybe even, you might never hear this from me again, it makes him, even in a subtle way, a little more interesting than the Borg, because it's a collective consciousness, but it can shift its organic expression based on need, based on will and desire. And, like, maybe the Demogorgon was the Mind Flayer's initial exploration and way of getting curious and learning more about the right side up, and realizing what had happened when it was killed through whatever telepathic link or whatnot. It sent, its new forms of itself to try to conquer the universe. And this is me just kind of developing a theory around that, trying to make sense of that character and how it's all working and what's actually going on,
Well, and it's interesting to hear you talking about it, because I got a completely different sense of the reasons for why in season 2 they're on 4 legs more. And
I'd love to hear it.
Well, to me, it was kind of like that they're younger versions of what will ultimately become a bunch of Demogorgons. But they're like, they're still growing. And so what I got was that they start off like, the episode's even called The Polywog, which is a tadpole. So they start off no limbs, very primitive forms, and then through their growth cycle, they develop limbs, and then I figure that eventually, if they weren't all killed by Hopper, like those creatures would have like grown up to be more upright and more humanoid. Like that would have been the apex of their growth cycle, is that they become more like people, as much as they can be like people. But yeah,
that totally makes sense, and that may actually be a better explanation. Yeah, and maybe each one recapitulates the life cycle of the whole species, and maybe the highest incarnation or expression, the oldest version, is the Mind Flayer itself.
Perhaps, yeah. But there is a very, you see hints of that. It's a very complicated reproductive system, because at the end of season 1, when they find Will, he's hooked up to this like creature, right? Like there's this tube attached to his mouth, and and then later it's implied that when he coughs up the slug in the sink, like it had something to do with that creature. So there must be some sort of intermediary stage or some other symbiotic life form that is represented by those slug things that attach, and then they can use bodies to incubate young that then become the Demogorgons. Because you saw that with Barb also, when Elle is in the sensory deprivation tank in the gymnasium.
Slug moving through her.
Yeah. So apparently they.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, like I think that what we're meant to take away from that is that in the Upside Down, these creatures, they can use bodies to grow their young, just kind of like how here on Earth we have wasps that can attack cockroaches and lay eggs inside of a cockroach, and it's pretty horrific, but the young can hatch inside of this still living cockroach and devour it from the inside out, and use that to sustain themselves until they get old enough to grow wings and fly away.
And it strikes me that would be probably the most effective way of surviving in a really horrific environment, is to cannibalize any other being that happens to also survive.
Yeah, because you see it in nature all the time. We don't see it on maybe family-friendly Disney documentaries or whatever, but it certainly happens a lot in nature.
Yeah, it's really kind of an emphasis. Go ahead.
Well, one thing I noticed too is that the Demogorgon in season 1 is impervious to bullets. Like the Secret Service people, they're just shooting at him with like assault rifles and stuff, and like it just keeps going. It's kind of like the Terminator that way. But at the end of season 2, Hopper's able to take out the younger ones with his shotgun, and so I think maybe like that's an indication too that as they get older, not only do they become bipedal and more humanoid, but they develop thicker armor that they can use to withstand the harsher conditions in the Upside Down.
Right. I think that would also explain like the kind of omnipresence of the organic matter stuff. Like if it really is that well developed and that parasitical, then maybe it and you kind of see this in the trees too. The trees and then the pumpkins. Like it kind of inhabits that other matter, consumes it, maybe even takes on its form and like replaces it. So maybe it's all of a piece, kind of a big giant parasite species thing. So to switch gears a little bit, episode 6, I liked the Steve and Dustin scene while they're walking on the train tracks. I like the fact that he still has the bat, that he saved the bat from the first season. I liked, for some reason, I don't even remember the context exactly, but in that same episode, Hopper says, "Hey, jackass, why don't you do us all a favor and shut up?" And, of course, when I saw that, I was like, yeah, that's who Tyler would be if he were a cop. Exactly how Tyler would be. So it's just his personality, which Tyler will enjoy when he hears this recording. He'll be loving that. Let's see. I've already talked about the bad men and the depersonalization of evil. The whole show's kind of Eleven's story. At certain points, it feels like it's really her arc. And I liked eventually, when I got used to it after about 15 minutes in it, that in episode 7, where she goes to meet her sister, they kind of reinvent the show. Like, it's a totally different show suddenly for a little bit. And it's I guess it's their answer, or I guessed that it was their answer to anyone who might be bored with the relatively by-the-numbers expansion of the basic Season 1 plot. Like, basic Season 1 plot. You have a mystery, a monster, you confront the monster at the end of it, you fight the monster off, everybody goes home happy. This one, you have a different monster, you kind of realize that it's a monster in a different way. You have another bigger monster that you kind of don't realize is a monster for a little while. You kind of have to convince people, which matches kind of like you had to convince people that there was a Demogorgon in the first season. And so, like, some people might accuse it of, like, oh, Season 2 was so like Season 1. It's kind of, in the last episode, she fights the big monster, kind of, which turns out to be the hole in reality. No, we're going to answer that by giving them this side story and the possibility of future side stories. So I liked that. I also liked how the episode underscored a path that Jane could take and then clarified that she wouldn't be taking it with the line, they can't save you. She says, oh, I know they can't save me, but I can save them. Like, that was awesome. And just, like, that says a lot about Eleven's character, the loyalty, the love, the friendship. And then, with Hopper and with Dr. Brenner, and then finally with Kali, people keep distinguishing what home is for Jane. And, like, this is the beauty of that scene at the end where you get the old woman talking to her on the bus. And why it isn't just some old, annoying woman talking to Jane while she's just trying to ride the bus home. Like, it's the moment where Jane finally, for herself, gets to create that distinction of home. Like, it's everybody else makes it for her. Hopper says, all right, this is your home now, in basically captivity. Brenner raised her in this space where it was not her home, but like called himself Papa so that she'd think of it as home. And then finally, Jane's mom's sister says, oh yeah, you can stay here now. This will be your home. And like, Jane never had the choice until finally she's going back to Hawkins, and the grandmother asks her, where are you going? And she says, I'm going home. And she's made her choice about what home is, which is so beautiful for a character who's had all that stuff happen to her. Yeah.
Well said.
Oh, thank you. I like just a couple paragraphs on the last 2 episodes. The entrance that Eleven makes. Oh, that's what we wanted all season, and it was beautifully
You're talking about the snowball?
Well, so at the snowball, that's its own kind of good entrance. But when she enters the cabin, like, and it's just the right moment, and it's just exactly when they need her. I mean, it's great. It's really entertaining.
Yeah.
It's really satisfying. I thought this was an interesting observation when they're like, and it was great for the main characters because it gave them time to get away. The demi-dogs apparently have kind of a pack mentality, and it makes sense because like the central mind is controlling them, but it seems like they were sharing. It seems like they each had their equal portion of Bob to eat, and not one of them was just consuming it by itself. So that's pretty good. I mean, like, you'll have your part and I'll have mine. You can have his arm, I'll take his leg. It's just they're very egalitarian, and when it comes to it, them being kind
this
of
Thanksgiving episode brought to you by Louis Brandmeier. And then I also like, and I've probably given this way too much thought, the fact that the heads of the Demogorgons, like their mouths, are filled with just so many teeth. It's just like, why do you need so many teeth? It's too many teeth, too many teeth, too many teeth.
I mean, like, it's terrifying. That definitely serves a narrative purpose. But, like, and how do they even work? I mean, maybe there's an impressively intricate muscular system within the mouths so that they can use those teeth to chew. I mean, I guess I'm thinking too far into it. Like, you don't bring a sci-fi sensibility to a horror film, just like you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. I mean, they're horrible because they look horrible, not because they make sense. Maybe. I'm not going to bring them. That's how I view this, though. I'm not a Mysterian. It can make sense, and they can even exploit it in the next season, like however they want.
Sure.
But
yeah.
So the last 5 points or so, the episode.
No.
No, I've been really detailed. I took some good notes on this.
Wow.
The scene with Nancy's mom and Max's brother, I've already said how much I love that. I felt like this familial violence was a bit harsh to watch, and I love Jonathan's response to them heating things up for Will. Like he just turns and clutches Nancy and starts weeping. Like, I just thought that was awesome. That's exactly how I'd feel if I had to, like, hurt somebody I love to heal them. I love how they take care of Steve. What a redemption for the character. Like, after he's been beaten to a pulp, they're, bandaging him up and taking them with him. I like the wrap-up at the very end. And my question, which will be the last one for us to engage on, and then I think we should conclude, is, where do we really think they go from here? I mean, I guess they go back to the Mind Flayer. I guess they assemble a team. But, like, what else is there for them to deal with as a series?
Well, I think that they have to deal with the fallout from the experimentation on the children, and then all the adults that suffer along the way, like Jane's mom. They basically lobotomized her. What I took away from the backstory about her mom is that she may have had some latent abilities of her own too. So maybe there's like stuff with that with some of the other survivors. Also, I think Will would make a very interesting next kind of thing to explore, plot to explore. Just like his own, what are his powers exactly, and like how is he different from someone like El, and what is his connection to the Upside Down? Because he's had the most contact now with anyone compared to anyone in the series with the Upside Down, and like he was mind controlled by the big baddie. So I'm sure that would give him some unique insights into what's going on. So yeah, that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, I think I want to see definitely some episodes of domestic bliss. Like, I think these characters deserve to be happy for a little while before something horrific happens. I mean, you can have your little scene at the end of the first episode. I'd even be happy with a whole episode or two where really only very, very slight nefarious things happen in the background. Like, and it's just character stuff. It's just like high school character stuff. I mean, I think that'd be good. And that's kind of the way that they've done it. They start slow with the darker fantasy horror threat, and they are more interested in, like in season 2 they had the party, right? And it was it was just drama because Nancy's getting drunk and she went home with the other guy. And what does that mean for Steve? And like, who's this other bully kind of guy, this new bully guy? And, well, I mean, that it becomes interesting against and integrated with the narrative of the larger plot because it impacts how the characters relate to each other and relate to that larger plot. But at some point, it took on its own interest for me. And I was just like, yeah, I want more of this, as I said earlier. So I think I'd be happy with that. The other gifted kids, figuring out like how that Mind Flayer gets portrayed and makes its way back into our reality. Like, I think that's going to be an interesting challenge for the writers to have some way that it tops what happened in the previous season, makes it more interesting, more intricate, more complicated, but also isn't just an escalation. You know, like I mean, you can't just suddenly, all right, now there are two of them. I mean, like that would not be that good. So, which incidentally is probably my favorite line from The Phantom Menace. And now there are two of them. Well, okay, it's not my favorite line. My actual favorite line is delivered with probably more gravitas than the line itself could handle. And now I will make it legal. It's just like, no, man. You making something legal is not scary, no matter how much you growl it. Anyway, I'm going to start where we're going to end where we started. The question we answer with Clever Orbits is how much can we love, enjoy, find meaning in, or discover the meaning of this or that piece of art. I think we've done a good job. This is our longest episode to date. I think in no small part thanks to our special guest star, Frank J. Kim. And so I want to thank you for engaging with me. I think I'm going to leave all of Stranger Things at a 5. No, you know what? A 5.1 out of 4 stars. I think my opinion of it has marginally improved beyond perfection since the beginning. And what final thoughts do you have, Frank?
Well, on your podcast, I appreciate it, and it's been a lot of fun. And my final thought is be excellent to one another.
I guess that would make you Bill and me Ted. Oh, wait, that's an 80s reference. Maybe that's a direction they'll go with season 3. Time travel.
Time travel within the same decade?
Yeah, time travel within the same decade. Like you can only go to 1987, where you witnessed the birth of Louis Brandmeier. Yeah. All right. To our listeners, thank you for listening and or watching if you found us on YouTube, although you probably just watched a very specific stationary photograph because that's all we've got in terms of content for YouTube. And please like, share, subscribe. Check us out next week. We'll be talking about another of the Borg episodes of Star Trek Voyager and our continuing quest to make some interesting sense of that amazing villain from Star Trek. Thank you all for listening. Have a wonderful night. Good night.